Try to bluff on the lick, got his ass whacked. Heard a nigga stamp, bro, we gon' get back. 392 F-Fins in the scat. Too greedy, he slimy, really that. All black ski masks, everybody slack.
There's a cold case, but they say they also...
When it gets to 6, and you're hearing stories about other bodies.
It was her.
Ski mask when he attacked victims and was usually armed with a knife.
In Little Rock, Arkansas, authorities are called to the south side of the city in the middle of the night. The caller described seeing an injured person walking by the streets. He was stumbling around and covered in blood.
I want to know something. I really never left New Jersey, cause y'all know niggas always go to Disney when they like kids and shit. Everybody go to Disney as a kid, but like other than that, I never really left New Jersey.
When police arrived,
I go to New York too, but like New York right here, so I don't really count that shit.
Lay lifeless on a porch. They didn't make it to him in time. It was determined that the man identified as 64-year-old Larry Eugene McChristian had suffered multiple stab wounds from a medium-sized knife, causing him to bleed out. The man had been reported missing only 2 days prior. The homeowner who called 911 was originally considered a suspect, but video evidence from security cameras has ruled him out. The video describes an unidentified man heading towards Gaines Street and approaching the victim, where he suddenly stabbed Larry. He then walked away, walked back, and stabbed him again. The footage, however, has no clues as to the identity of the suspect. Almost a month later, on the 23rd of September, a friend of another man, 62-year-old Jeff Welch, decided to come and visit one day at his home address of 12th Street. To his shock, he found his friend Jeff deceased on his front porch with what seemed to be a deep cut on his neck. At first, authorities were not sure if this was a murder or a strange accident. However, after the biopsy, it was found that the wounds were not only stab wounds from a knife, but the wounds were also consistent with the previous murder. A solid connection was not made until April 11th, 2021, when 40-year-old Deborah Walker was attacked on South Pulaski Street, where a garage camera caught the attack.
She was crazy that it's really people out here that really walk around like crazy like this.
Stabbed over 15 times and left for dead. Thankfully, authorities were able to locate her and rush her to the hospital before it was too late. When questioned by the police, she was described being approached by a stranger at 19th and Marshall Street. Without anything said or even hinted, he pulled out a knife and stabbed her. The description of the man given by her is a little bit helpful. A young, skinny black man, a little over 6 feet tall. When local police brought this information to the FBI, they profiled the suspect as a serial killer, connecting all the crimes together. Less than a day after the FBI file was submitted, a homeless man named Marlon Anthony Franklin was found stabbed multiple times to death, no more than a block away from where Deborah was stabbed. All of these attacks happened between 1 and 4 a.m. against strangers that were walking alone. Police have since increased their presence in the neighborhood and are offering $20,000 to anyone who can provide information leading to the man's arrest. Still, he roams the streets, waiting to claim his next victim. In Chicago, over 75 women have been killed by strangulation between 2001 and 2017. The police never took this too seriously, as the women were almost all part of illegal businesses, and there wasn't much to connect the murders to one person. It was likely a bunch of unrelated incidents. However, pressure from the families and community caused police to investigate this in 2019.
You hear about like 2 bodies, you think you're nuts. When it gets to 6 and you're hearing stories about other bodies, you start to think that probably not the most common method of settling a drug dispute.
But no important information was unearthed. In 2021, a 3-part documentary series titled The Hunt for the Chicago Strangler was released, where it was found that not only are these murders very likely to be the work of a singular person, but whoever that is still at large and will continue to murder many more times before he is caught. The police still put these murders on violence from drug disputes. However, the community believes otherwise. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Does the Chicago Strangler exist, or is it a bunch of unconnected coincidences? Our next killer can be found in Kauai, Hawaii, with most of his work being done in the early 2000s. On April 7th of 2000, a woman was discovered in a ditch next to Polyholly State Park. She suffered multiple stab wounds, with the fatal wound being to her neck. She was identified as 38-year-old Lisa Basil. Some of her belongings were found miles away, by a narrow road in Waimea. Police believe that she was attacked there. Fast forward a little over a month later, on May 22nd, the attempted murder of a 52-year-old local was reported to the police. The incident went as such. The attacker approached a woman who was working in her front yard at the time and blurted out, "My name is John, and I am homeless." She pointed out a neighbor that typically allowed homeless people to camp out on the property, suggesting he go there. Before she could return to her yard work, she was grabbed by the man, had her arm broken, and was dragged behind her home where he stabbed her. The knife bent when it hit the victim's ribcage, and the man immediately fled the scene. It wasn't until 3 hours that had passed that the victim was able to reach a phone to call for help. Her identity has not been released. In a statement, the chief of police the next day, he said this, "It's been 2 months, and I still cringe when the telephone rings at 2 a.m. I'm thinking, I hope it's not another victim." 2 months later, the body of another middle-aged woman was discovered at a remote campfire by Picala Point Beach. 43-year-old Darren Singer was identified as the victim, succumbing to the stab wound in her neck. Autopsy revealed to police that she was killed no more than 12 hours before she was discovered. The previous surviving victim tried to help police identify the attacker, with a composite sketch and even a police lineup. There was still no luck. Since, there has been 2 murders that have yet to be connected to the serial killer, in 2010 and another much more recently in 2021. The murders were very
crazy. It's crazy to think that these niggas is currently active, meaning like they still never got caught.
To the previous cases. The 2 new victims were middle-aged women that succumbed to stab wounds, and the crimes were all committed on the west coast of Kauai. The local community believes that there exists a very patient serial killer in Kauai, still active to this day. Our next case begins on February 2nd, 2009, when a woman was walking her dog through a hilly part of Albuquerque, New Mexico. She noticed a weird-looking cacti in the desert. When she decided to take a closer look, a deep chill ran down her spine. It was a human bone. She immediately called 911, and when police arrived at the scene, a forensic team began excavating the site. It was expected that police would finish up in a day or 2, but when 3 days passed, then 4, then a whole week, it was clear to the locals that something more sinister was at play in the area.
They won't call the West Mesa murders a cold case, but they say they also won't name any suspects involved, and they actually have a bigger pool of people they're looking at than ever before.
The more they dug, the more remains they found. By February 10th, the horrifying reality of the situation had finally sunk in. 11 female bodies were recovered from the giant hole. The unknown perpetrator for this crime was named as the West Mesa Bone Collector. The bodies were scattered at different depths, some at the surface, some as deep as 8 feet. The first body that they managed to identify was 26-year-old Victoria Chavez. The bodies were so unrecognizable, the only way she could be identified was through dental records. She was reported missing way back in March of 2005. The weird thing about her case is that she was missing for over a year before her family decided to ring the police. She also had issues with substance abuse, a common theme amongst the 11 women that were found buried. By February 18th, still only 6 of the 11 women had been identified. At this point, the FBI had to get involved. The worst part was that most of the other women, such as the 22-year-old Michelle Valdez, family members were begging authorities to look into her disappearance. There were dozens of people urging authorities to investigate this, but nothing was done. As a result, a lot more innocent people lost their lives to the bone collector. In the end, the cause of death was ruled as homicidal violence, and the culprit has still yet to be identified. Police considered a couple suspects, Lorenzo Montoya, Joseph Blea, and Scott Kimball.
Investigators say Blea wore a ski mask when he attacked victims and was usually armed with a knife.
Blea is also a suspect in a very large case that's gained national attention. As we've learned and reported last year, Blea is a suspect in the West Mesa murders.
However, nobody has been charged with the crimes, and it is still believed that the murderer is still out there. In 2010, A routing search of a coastline in New York City uncovered a horrifying dumping ground for bodies. Within a few months, 11 female bodies were identified. They were all victims of a perpetrator dubbed the Long Island serial killer. All of the women struggled with substance abuse and poverty. The first body to be identified was 24-year-old Melissa Barthelemy. The promise of fast cash in the big city made her decide to become a night worker, with aspirations of opening up a nail salon of her own.
9 times out of 10, this is probably a Law and Order episode. No funny shit.
Someday, little did she know this would be the biggest mistake she made in her life. From 1996 to the 2010s, over 17 bodies are believed to be linked to this serial killer. The media has speculated about a profile of the killer, referred to
17, the other nigga had 11. I don't know which one was.
Police as Joe C. According to the New York Times, the perpetrator is most likely a white male who would have been in his mid-20s to mid-40s, and who is very familiar with the South Shore of Long Island. He had access to burlap sacks, which he used to hold the bodies for disposal. He may have had a detailed knowledge of law enforcement techniques and perhaps ties to law enforcement, which have thus far helped him avoid detection. Newsday reporters speculated that the serial killer Joel Rifkin, a former resident on Long Island, may have been responsible for some of the older remains found in March and April of 2011. 4 of the victims' complete bodies have never been found. But in an April 2011 prison interview with Newsday, Rifkin denied having anything to do with the recently discovered remains. Anyways, that is all.
That shit was random and crazy, no funny shit. But that's this vid. Let me know what y'all think of them niggas being still not caught. Like, do y'all niggas live with these niggas? For me, did they shit out, whatever. But that's in the vid. My IG DiorJew. My Snap YBWJew, and my OnlyFans free subscription. I DiorJew. Hit that like, hit that sub button.